everyone. My name is Coreen Abbott, and I'm in San Francisco. And thanks for joining me for my presentation on Chinese fast firing, Rethinking Raku. And I want to begin by showing images of Gu Cheng village, which is where I went to observe in China, the fast fire. And then I want to talk about the origins of Raku and how it migrated west. Okay. First of all, kind of doing an introduction here, right? Because most of you have heard of Raku, right? And maybe you've done it in your work. I don't do it in my work, but I love doing it with my students. And when I say the word Raku, I think we all kind of conjure up the same sort of process, which for the most part is derivative of what Paul Solner showed in his workshops beginning in the 1960s. So you have a bisque pot or form, glazed or unglazed, and you place it on the kiln oftentimes or inside of a kiln to warm it up, and then put it in the kiln for maybe 15, 30 minutes until it's just right, and then pulling it out and putting it into a combustible material, which then it just explodes into flames, right? And then you want to cover it quickly with like a metal bucket. And at that time, the clay body is so open that it's just going to absorb in all of the carbon, okay? And then just smother it in that carbon. And of course, everybody has their variation. On the left, this was I thought this was funny. This is in Faenza, Italy. And these people had taken an old mobile gelato cart and turned it into a mobile Raku cart. And then I got this off the internet, the shopping cart that was transformed into a Raku kiln. But it's always, it's always dramatic. It's fun to do. And I always add in Raku s'mores. So I've been working with clay for 51 years. And professionally for over 45 years. I love clay. We all do, right? That's why we're here. We share something so familiar. Clay is universal, while at the same time, every piece is unique. It's the perfect medium for innovation, no matter what one's sensibility. So, from hindsight, I can see that some of my best stuff has come from rethinking something that I just kind of had on auto absorb and hadn't really examined. Or maybe somebody has shown me a new perspective on something that I thought I knew. I love history, and I'm curious about cultural choices and how ideas move from one group to another. So you can see this is my work. And I don't do Raku other than with my students. But I think it's astounding the variations that we all have of working with clay, and how innovations have emerged and migrated around the world. And Raku is an excellent example of that. So while I was teaching at the Nanjing University of the Arts, Lu Bin, who's the head of the department, head of the ceramics department, he showed me his film from 2009, Ethnic Potters of Southwest China. And when it came to the firing methods in a town, Zaijin, I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. They were performing what I would have called Raku. They were fast firing with post reduction. And Lu Bin said that they know that they've been doing it for at least 1,000 years and probably up to 2,000 years. Some researchers have found that it most likely migrated down from Mongolia. So this led me to question where American Raku actually originated and to go to see this process firsthand. Like a lot of us, I was taught that Raku was 16th century Japanese. But what I was seeing was more like what we did than what was done in Japan. So this led to question why we call fast fire with post reduction, why we call it Raku. It's sometimes more like branding, I think. It's really more like an eponym. It's like products, Xerox, Kleenex. And then when I started looking around, I found that not many people knew about Chinese fast firing. So to give you an idea, on the left is a map that shows the coal-bearing regions in China. And mostly in the central area is where you find this fast firing happening. And so you can see, and it's Xi'an. A lot of you know Xi'an. They'll do the fast firing there. Gu Cheng, which is where I went to, is in the light blue. Zhaijin, where Lu Bin's film was, that's in the yellow. And then a lot of you have heard of Jingdezhen. So I wanted to put that in there to give you kind of an perspective. That, of course, is the porcelain capital. See on the map where Shanghai is, and then Nanjing is just a little north and west from there. So here we are in the center of Gu Cheng village in Sichuan province. The nearest airport is Chengdu. So one of my students, Daniela, set up her brother, Hua Mingshu, as my translator, and her friend Lu Kuai as our guide. And he, like numerous other potters, have settled in this area to use the resources of the village to make their contemporary work. And you can see it's, this town is like, it's all clay. Everything is about clay. It's like going to Candyland. Everything's made out of clay. There's clay everywhere, pots everywhere. And note the truck up on the top right. Okay, because we'll get to that. So this is an example of the commercial ware that they're making, that the traditional factories are making. And most of the pots are used for cooking medicines. Some are used for soups. And once the purchaser takes the piece home, they will boil a batch of sticky rice in the pot and then toss that out, let it dry, and that seals the pores. And Daniela told me that really most Chinese homes would have one of these pots, and that silvery surface is just so great. So here we are, there's that truck again, and they're loaded, ready to go to the local markets. And just note on the back of the truck, there's a little driveway, okay? And that's where we're gonna go down. And we're gonna go down into one of the main factories. So this is one of the largest workshops. There are about 10 in the village. On the right-hand side are the fabricators, and then on down towards the middle is where they do all of the firing. So here's one of the fabricators. They're jiggering the base of the pot. When it gets leather hard, then a coil is added, and then it's thrown. The clay is 50% coal cinder powder. 25% of the local earthenware that they get from the fields, the local fields, and then another 25% of the yellow kaolin from up in the mountains. And Lu Bin said that each village has some kind of a variation of those ingredients. And I just put that, see the pot in the middle, and just note the anchoring. They've put in a really heavy weight to anchor the pot down while they're working on it, rather than the pads on the side. And also the clay is aged. It's aged for 6 months before they use it. And then it goes to another station where they do the handles and the spout and add decorations, such as the dragon is, of course, a very popular image in Chinese work. It's a symbol of power. And if the dragon has captured the pearl in its mouth, then that's a sign of prosperity. And we see the fellow making the lids. He's throwing the flange on the leather hard form of the lid. And I threw in this slide of one of the lids had a crack in it. And so he scraped it, filled it with clay, and that relieved the cracking. And it just tells you the character of the clay. Not all clays can you do that with. And I also threw in the up in the top left, this fellow was using a metal tape measure as his trimming tool, and I just thought that was interesting. Here is another fabricator who is building up coils and then throwing large bulbous forms from the coils. So as we go down farther, we come to the kiln and the kiln masters, and they're beginning the firing process here. So the first step is to sift the coal onto the floor of the kiln. They're doing about 3 scoops of anthracite coal, okay, distributed around the floor of the kiln. You can see some of the pots are in the foreground on the reduction pit that they're warming up, pots in the background warming up also. And next they're going to get loaded. So loading the kiln, all the pots are placed onto chucks, which are reused. You can see they end up with a heavy buildup over time. And that just helps to keep from the pots having to be directly onto the chunks of coal that are on the floor of the kiln. Okay, and then once the kiln is loaded, the walk cover kiln, the walk-shaped dome is cantilevered into place and lowered. And next, the forced air blower will be turned on, and that reignites the remaining hot coals. And you can see the dome is pretty simple. There on the interior, there's like rebar, and then they've packed clay around that, and it's become fired. So it's pretty simple. So before the next load comes out, one of the 2 reduction pits needs to be emptied out. So pot by pot, they pull those out. You can see that they come out kind of stuck together. Here you can see they're just randomly stacked in the reduction pit. Okay, just one by one, pulling them out of the reduction pit. And then somebody else comes and separates the pot, separates the chuck. And in this case, the jugs that have the handles, she's tying a rope around the 8 pots, make it easier to load it up to the truck. And then the little cart is loaded up with pots, ready to take up to that truck. And this, you can see the variation in the silvery buildup, and there's no glaze. So there's quite a bit of variation. You saw some that were really bubbly, some just really didn't have very much on their surface at all. This really shows you how much buildup can happen. The spout on the left, you can see on the right, there's some slumping, as well as you can see where it was resting inside of another pot, that it resisted the silver buildup. And I don't know about you, but I love trash pits. I love to see what goes wrong. And here you can see they're encountering some cracking and some variation of heat in the kiln, causing too much fusing of the chuck or slumping. And this workshop, I thought, was interesting that they sanded the heck out of these pots, out of the surface, and it's still kind of silvery, but they sanded them so much they get them very smooth sheen. So here we are back at the kilns. You can see one of our kiln masters lying down on a lounge up in the top left, and the moat has been hoed going around the reduction pit. Pots are still warming up and just having a little bit of a break until it's time. And here they go. They've eyeballed it. They've gotten close to temperature, which is 2,192 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,200 degrees centigrade. And they're starting to gear up. So he's got his thermal apron over the shoulder, the hat that has a big brim is great protection. The towel over the face is water soaked. Okay, so they're geared up. First thing to do is to get the first scoop of sawdust down into the reduction pit, and they're hosing water into that moat. And boom, the action begins. The wok lid, the wok cover is cantilevered off, and they begin one by one pulling the pots out. Okay, pot by pot. See, they really pick up a lot of the coal that's on the floor of the kiln, and down into the reduction pit, trying to separate one of the last pots. And you can see pulling this out, they couldn't get the chuck off, they couldn't get the pots separated. And that's it, last pull. Okay, and the last scoop of sawdust is added, and it's so hot, it just explodes. Sparks everywhere. Okay, and then trying to get that metal disc on, working fast, get that on as fast as they can. And then shoveling the wet coal around the seams. And here you can see that the flame is just desperate for oxygen, forcing that flame to just roar out. And then the process begins again. They do it 8 to 10 times a day. And if you want to refer to it, my article is in Ceramics Monthly, April 2019, in the clay culture section. So this is an example of some of the contemporary work that's being done by people like Lu Kai that have come to this village, and I think it's happening in many of the other villages as well. And they've come to take advantage of the technology and the clay. And it's a resurgence in their cultural heritage, which what I've noticed in China is very well supported by the government to hang on to their cultural heritage in many ways. So now I want to change gears. Oh, here's another slide. Oh, and the pot on the left, I'm not sure exactly how old that is. I think that's an old piece, but the pieces on the right are contemporary pieces. So now I want to change gears and talk a little bit about where Raku came from and how it came to the West. So here we have Senno Rikyu, who is a tea master. He began as the tea master for a feudal lord, Oda Nobunaga, and then for his successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. And Rikyu wanted to create a new tea experience that was more in alignment with what was thought of as wabi-sabi. It's kind of a newish philosophy, the acceptance of transience, imperfection, incomplete, impermanent. And this was a newish philosophy. The when tea drinking was done at that time, it was done with Chinese pots that were very perfect, uniform, predictable results, very clean, a lot of shiny glazes, very precise. And so Rikyu engaged a roof tile maker that he had met, Tanaka Chojiro, to share in the development of this new style of teaware. And you can see there's quite a bit of technical skill in roofing. Okay, so this, that lion is identified as a piece by Chojiro. So you can see why he asked him to share in this. Also, Chojiro's father is thought to have been a potter and skilled in Sankai ware, which you can see the tiles in the middle are an example of that. It's 3 different glazes and very shiny, which takes a lot of technique, and it is Chinese. And so it's thought that Chojiro's father was from China. And, you find differing opinions. Some say he was from Korea, that he came from China to Korea or just came from Korea. Nothing is known for certain. It's also thought that he came from Wuzhou in China, which is a port town. So he could have come from anywhere in China. So what I'm leading to is that he could have been aware of the Chinese fast fire with post-production. The centerpiece is a piece that's attributed to Chojiro. And his ware was so admired that Chojiro was given a gold seal as an honor by Toteami. And it had an inscription on it, Raku, which means comfort, ease, relief. And he took that as his family name. Okay, so that's where we got Raku. So then Raku coming to the West, um, it's not sure, did it come from Bernard Leach or Warren Gilbertson? So Bernard Leach wrote a book, The Potter's Book, which he published in 1940, which became the go-to book for studio potters. And in a small chapter, he describes his experience from 1911 while he was living in Japan. And he was invited with other artists to go to this garden party in Tokyo. And at the time, he was living in Japan teaching etching. And at this party, there were like 20 or 30 people that were each given um, a number of bisque pots and told that they could decorate them in any way they wanted with oxides or underglazes. And as Leach mentions in the book, he said that they were given these queer long brushes, which of course we know of as our bamboo brushes. Then the pot is taken and dipped into a clear lead glaze and put on top of the kiln to warm up for about 20 minutes, and then put into the kiln until the glaze becomes shiny and smooth. And then the pot is taken out and set on a tile to cool. And this is how he described it in his book. That experience fueled Leach to redirect all of his artistic efforts towards ceramics. So from etching, he started on the path to ceramics, of which we all know Bernard Leach had a tremendous influence on Western studio ceramics. And although the Raku experience was the catalyst, he still thought of Raku as not being a technique that was appropriate for a serious studio potter, but a way of just having fun with friends. Then we have Warren Gilbertson, who lived in Japan from 1938 to 1940. And he also studied Raku there. And when he returned to the US in 1940, he began teaching at the Art Institute of Chicago. And there he taught and practiced the Raku process. And he published an article, Making of Raku Ware and Its Value in the Teaching of Beginners, in the American Ceramic Society Bulletin in 1943. Unfortunately, he died in a car accident in 1954 at the age of 44. Otherwise, we might have heard more of him. Then there was Hal Reiger, who was in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he had read Leach's book and Gilbertson's article. And he even published in Ceramics Monthly in 1965 about Raku. But his first Raku experience, somehow he missed the part about bisquing first. And he decided to have a Raku party like Leach had, only he didn't bisque anybody's pieces and everything blew up. And at that point, he was like, the heck with Raku. And it wasn't until 1958, and he went to Haystack, and he heard people talking about Raku. So he picked it up again and began doing it in earnest. And then that became what he was known for, was Raku. There's also another person, Jean Griffith, who is in Seattle. And she's known for doing Raku in the late 40s. And she also did post-reduction. And when she was asked where she came up with post-reduction, she couldn't remember. So that leads us back to Paul Soldner. And he had also read the Potter's Book, and he thought it was very interesting. And so he decided to give it a try. But he didn't like he thought, the clay was kind of yellowish and the oxides remained kind of garish. And so on a hunch, he took the red hot pot and he rolled it into some pepper tree leaves. And at that point, he said, I developed an appreciation for the imperfect. I found a new freedom of openness and acceptance. But keep in mind, he was also one of Peter Volkas's first students, and they were all talking about wabi-sabi in Peter Volkas's early days at Otis. So he was then, Solner was then asked to demonstrate, and he automatically called it Raku. Solner saw other people in the US doing Raku and post-reduction, so he just assumed that the post-reduction was part of the Raku process from Japan. And it wasn't until he went to Japan for the first time in 1971 that he realized that they didn't do the post-reduction. Then he was invited to demonstrate at the World Craft Council meeting in Kyoto next to the Mr. Raku, and was criticized by him for using the name Raku. And Solner accepted the criticism and said, well, we could call it Ukar, since so many things we do in the United States are backwards. And I don't think Mr. Raku thought that was very funny. And so he said, well, why don't you do like I do and just call it Solnerware? But here we are. We still keep calling it Raku. And potter by potter, workshop by workshop, book by book around the world, we're all enamored by the spontaneous effects, the endless innovations. Here we are today. Look at the variation. You know, who hasn't been seduced by the colors, the effects? And who knows where we would go from here. You know, when I first started out, you know, you never saw the pop-off slip or the bright colors like James Watkins is showing. Horsehair, you never saw any of the naked Raku techniques. So, you know, it's open for something new. But I'd like us all to consider, you know, should we change the name? I don't know. I go back and forth with my students. I always refer to it as fast firing, and I say Raku because everybody knows what Raku is when I say that. But I do want to make sure that the Chinese get credit. They were the first to do fast firing. They were first to do the post-fire reduction. And as far as I know, they're the only culture that adds coal to the clay body. Isn't that amazing that even in our Appalachia, nobody has done that. I don't even know of anybody in that region that fired with coal. So, you know, I think we need to remember that Raku is a proprietary eponym. And whether we change that or not is up to you guys. Be curious to hear what you have to say. But I think that there is a value in being aware of ceramic practices globally, as well as recognizing and rethinking sources and variations, you know, which makes our understanding of clay more dimensional. You know, and then that leads to sparks of innovation, and boom, we're off into new territory. So, as has been said, the more shoulders we stand on, the clearer our view is. So thank you. Thank you for being at my presentation, and I'll look forward to any questions you have.